Should you buy Watch Dogs Legion in 2024? I finally got around to playing the third installment in the Watch Dogs franchise over 3 years since I first pre-ordered the game. When I first tried playing it, it didn't hook me like previous Watch Dogs games had done, and so I just left the game and only returned recently to see if I was missing out on anything significant. I absolutely love Watch Dogs 2, and I also really enjoyed the original Watch Dogs game, so I was curious to see how Watch Dogs Legion improves on the formula. I wasn't exactly served with what I was expecting from the game, but the game provides very unique mechanics and a fun gameplay system paired with a beautiful setting, albeit with a story that is much worse for wear when compared to the previous 2 entries in the series. I'll be breaking down the presentation, story, and gameplay of Watch Dogs Legion, of course without any spoilers, to see if the game is worth it for you in 2024. Broadly speaking, on a presentational level, Watch Dogs Legion does look pretty good. The various suburbs, cars, and environments of futuristic London are truly there to shine, and it is easily one of the game's greatest components, as the entire character of London as a city is painted in pure brilliance throughout the game. Landmarks such as Big Ben or the London Eye are clearly visible in the city and provided the much needed spark of realism amongst a futuristic and fictionalized depiction of the city that provides it with much needed flair. London is much different to the bright and vibrant tones of San Francisco seen in Watch Dogs 2, as dynamic weather systems often coat the city with rain, but when the sun is back in action, the city shines in its inner beauty. I didn't enjoy the views of this city more than that of Watch Dogs 2 and its beautiful and large landscapes in San Francisco, but in a way, London blends the dark colors of Chicago with the vibrancy of San Francisco to create a truly futuristic and technologically advanced city in every metric. Despite all the praise for the game's city and its presentational prospects, the game doesn't really excel in any other department in terms of facial animations or the smaller details scattered throughout the game's presentational prospects, which is pretty typical for most Ubisoft games at this point, even if at the forefront they look fantastic. Facial animations in the game are really nothing to boast about, but the game's unique presentation of a futuristic setting in London is well done, and I think you'll be mostly happy with the presentational prospects that are provided by Watch Dogs Legion in your playthrough. I'll just preface this section by purely stating I didn't really like the story of Watch Dogs Legion all that much, and it's not a very good story in any way. The story is actually my main contention point with the game, because I honestly believe the game's gameplay systems are just as good as the previous 2 games, but that just isn't complemented by a story that is at least on par with the stories of the previous 2 games. It's not like the first Watch Dogs or the second one were masterclasses in storytelling, but they told fun and interesting stories that would keep you engaged constantly with both the personal and overarching stakes of the characters involved. But what strings the stories of previous entries together to make something pretty cohesive and engaging throughout its entire runtime is the fact that they actually have a cast of interesting side characters, but most importantly a main character whose struggles within the main story are our own. That's exactly what the main story of Watch Dogs Legion lacks in every capacity. The stakes of the story always feel low because of the game's unique mechanic of being able to play as anyone you see. I'll delve further into the intricacies of this particular mechanic in the next section, but the prospects of being able to recruit any person to DedSec and then play as them for the duration of the story while continually switching around means that there is no central protagonist in the story, meaning your connection to whatever character you play as is more than lackluster. Of course, as making everyone playable is a big task, they don't exactly all have interesting personalities and backstories, and so you're stuck playing as a bunch of generic character creations in a way. I think the premise of the story is kind of interesting, but it lacks merit in the fact that no central character is there to create personal motivations in the story or to create real tension with the game's various clans and antagonists. Instead, the story of Watch Dogs Legion seems to be a telltale sign that prioritizing the prowess of a certain gameplay gimmick can be detrimental to the quality of the story, and to be honest, I wasn't really engaged much throughout the game's main campaign, especially when compared to other stories in the franchise. Honestly, the DLC featuring Aiden Pierce and Wrench for the game had a much better and cohesive story than the main story of Watch Dogs Legion itself, which is by all accounts really disappointing, and I finished the game not exactly satisfied with the writing and plot points featured throughout the game. The gameplay of Watch Dogs Legion is easily its greatest component. The gameplay of the previous Watch Dogs games was an absolute blast in my opinion, as it provided much diversity to the general open world mechanics of other GTA likes, in the manner hacking is so infused into the game's overall DNA. Unlike the game's story and certain aspects of its presentation, the gameplay here is quite refined and pretty fun by all departments. I think firstly I'll discuss the game's free roam and open world exploration, and then following a discussion of the game's combat and general hacking mechanics around the futuristic London you are encapsulated in. The general free roam and exploration around London is super fun, as all the vehicles are easy to control and share various aesthetics that makes them fun to constantly switch through. The game from my playthrough lacked much customization in the car department, although I don't think car customization was even in previous entries of the series, but honestly it doesn't really matter. It's just as fun as before making cars go the wrong direction and changing traffic lights as it was in previous games, and the hacking remains solid in this game as well, with certain refinements that make it the best hacking system seen in a Watch Dogs game. You also constantly upgrade your hacking abilities throughout the game as you gather skill points that allow you to better disrupt your enemies in combat, in addition to unlocking new gadgets that change the way you play in a significant way. Gadgets such as the game's Spider Bot, Electro Fist, and Invisibility Cloak provide different ways to approach combat and general exploration in the game, providing the gameplay mix a much needed flair that keeps the gameplay constantly engaging throughout your 15 to 20 hour playthrough of the main campaign. The game also has another distinction in its gameplay mechanics through the very unique prospects offered by the ability to recruit anyone to DedSec and thus play as them in every encounter in the game. The game holds true to this standard in every way, although different people may require certain upgrades and missions to be completed before you're able to actually recruit them. In this department, many people in the game provide different gadgets and strengths, which actually makes switching between recruits viable throughout the game, at least for the first few hours. The game allows you to recruit them by doing a series of missions that are related to the wants of that certain recruit, where when completed they join your team. I was actually recruiting different people for the first few hours, as some offered light machine guns and armor, while others allowed me to summon a mountable cargo drone wherever I was. The unique abilities of these certain recruits is definitely a plus for the game, and it definitely provides much needed variety in an otherwise pretty generic combination of gameplay systems. The problem with this is that the game's overall mission design isn't very good, and even with the main story, it feels like you're constantly doing the same thing over and over again. Hacking something while taking down some enemies and then escaping is the motto of Watch Dogs Legion throughout every single mission, from the main campaign to the recruitment missions themselves. This made recruitment missions a chore for me, and after about 8 characters recruited, I saw no reason to constantly collect any more to the team, as the ones I had provided the skills I needed to get through the game more than comfortably. I think this is the main weak point of the gameplay in Watch Dogs Legion, as overall the gameplay systems are fun and interesting to interact with, but a distinct lack of mission variety throughout the entire runtime of the game makes certain actions such as recruiting new people to DedSec a chore in a way, and one that is not needed in any capacity once you've got a few people in your team. But that doesn't detract from how cool and unique this mechanic is, and it may appeal to you in a way it didn't for me in a greater way, as just being able to play as anyone is still one of the most interesting gameplay mechanics I've ever seen in an open world game, and it provides Watch Dogs Legion that stark diversity from other GTA likes and even other games in its own franchise. Also quickly, the combat in the game is pretty similar to the previous games in the series in terms of both how the guns control and play and how the gadgets can be used to help you in combat, although they suffice to do much more in this game opposed to before. Going invisible and then sneaking down to take an enemy or using an electric fist made it super fun to engage in combat constantly, and it kept encounters always fresh. Something I surprisingly really liked despite it lacking any sort of depth was the game's melee combat system and how you can dodge and weave while throwing punches to eventually take down your enemies. Honestly, this was the main way I approached most encounters in the game, as it felt floaty but also satisfying with the impact it held, making the melee combat here something that was surprisingly really enjoyable. Overall, the gameplay prospects of Watch Dogs Legion are quite fantastic, and you'll have a lot of fun interacting with its various unique gameplay systems, which should provide much of the value you were expecting from the game, and is a main reason I'd purchase the game in 2024. The final verdict here is that I believe you should buy Watch Dogs Legion in 2024 if you are a fan of open world games, and if you're able to pick this game up on discount, where it usually is constantly. Right now it's only $10 on Steam, which is more than a fair price for the game. I think you'll be rightly satisfied with the package you get for such a low price, but I think buying the game for any more than $30 for example, even if you're a fan of the Watch Dogs franchise, might not see you be very happy about your decision. It's an okay game, but it isn't as good as the first 2 entries in the series, which is mainly contributed to the game's lackluster main story, but the gameplay and presentation of the game are quite good, making this a fun open world game you can mess around in for hours. Anyway, that's all from me for today's video. If you enjoyed, consider subbing to the channel and dropping a like, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.